You can feel it, can't you? That subtle heaviness in your chest, the one that quietly follows you even on the days when everything seems fine. It appears without warning, almost like a shadow you forgot belonged to you, whispering that something in your life has been held too tightly for far too long. This is where the story begins. Not in peace, not in clarity, but in the tension that rises when the soul struggles to release what it has outgrown. What if the very thing you are clinging to is the weight that keeps you from rising? What if letting go is not the end of something, but the beginning of your freedom? The ancient philosophers believed that the human heart becomes imprisoned not by external chains, but by the invisible attachments we create within ourselves. These attachments are never loud at first. They slip in quietly, shaped by fear, shaped by desire, shaped by the illusion that control is the same as safety. You hold on to people, to memories, to expectations, to stories about who you think you must be. You hold on because you believe that letting go means losing something important. You believe that holding on is strength. But the truth, as the Stoics discovered, is that the act of holding on can become the most delicate and exhausting form of slavery. Imagine a traveler standing at the edge of a river. He has carried a heavy stone across miles of land, convinced that it was precious, convinced that he could not abandon it. But when he reaches the river, he realizes something painful and undeniable. If he enters the water while holding the stone, he will drown. If he lets it go, he will cross. Yet he hesitates, not because he needs the stone, but because he has carried it for so long that he doesn't know who he is without it. This is the quiet tragedy Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus warned us about, the human instinct to cling even when the weight is destroying us. Letting go is not a single decision. It is the slow, unfolding understanding that what feels familiar is not always what is helpful. It is the realization that peace does not come from tightening your grip on the world, but from loosening the knots you've tied around your own heart. Every fear, every longing, every memory becomes a thread you unconsciously wrap around yourself, believing it will hold you together. But with time, those threads become ropes, and the ropes become walls, and the walls become the prison that steals your ability to breathe freely. This is why the Stoics taught that liberation begins from within, long before any external circumstances change. There is an ancient teaching that says suffering comes from resisting the natural flow of life. The universe moves in cycles, gain and loss, arrival and departure, rising and falling, and the human heart suffers when it tries to fix what is meant to move. You hold on to the past because you fear the unknown. You hold on to familiar pain because you don't trust unfamiliar peace. You hold on to people because you think they complete you. But life is not a museum of frozen moments. It is a river, always moving, always reshaping itself, always asking you to move with it. And the more you resist this movement, the more you feel torn between who you were and who you are becoming. In the stillness of early morning, before the world stirs, there is a sacred moment where the mind is honest with itself. You might feel it when you wake and sense the echo of something unresolved. You might feel it when you sit alone, and the noise of daily life dissolves just long enough for truth to surface. In that silence, you may notice how much energy you spend holding yourself together, how much effort it takes to keep old wounds alive, how much of your identity has been shaped by things that were never meant to stay. The ancient philosophers believed that clarity begins when the noise fades and the soul speaks plainly. Letting go is an art precisely because it is not forced. It is learned through awareness, through patience, through the courage to sit with your own discomfort. It feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, uncertain if the fall will break you or free you. But the cliff is an illusion. You are not standing at the edge of your existence. You are standing at the threshold of transformation. The Stoics taught that fear appears not because something terrible is happening, but because something new is trying to be born and the mind does not yet understand it. There is a deeper truth hidden beneath the surface of every attachment. You cling not to the thing itself, but to the meaning you gave it. The person you can't let go of may symbolize belonging. The dream you refuse to release may symbolize worth. The past you keep replaying may symbolize identity. To let go feels impossible because it demands that you face the real question, who are you if these symbols disappear? This is why the Stoics insisted that freedom comes not from the removal of life's challenges, but from the removal of false meanings. You were never meant to find yourself in things that can disappear. The first step in letting go is not release, it is recognition. The awareness that something inside you is tightening when life is asking you to loosen your grip. You begin to observe your own reactions, your own fears, your own clinging. You begin to see how much of your suffering comes not from what happened to you, but from the story you built around it. You begin to understand that the world is not hurting you. You are hurting yourself by refusing to adapt to what the world is showing you. In this realization, something begins to shift. It is subtle, like the first crack of light before dawn. You do not change instantly, but you begin to sense that change is possible. You begin to breathe a little deeper. You start to see that your worth does not depend on holding everything together. You start to understand that letting go is not a loss. It is the soft opening of space where something new can enter. This moment, this quiet awakening, is the beginning of inner freedom. It is the beginning of peace. It is the beginning of the long journey toward releasing what no longer serves your heart, your mind, or your becoming. And as you take your first step forward, you begin to feel that the chains you once feared losing were never chains at all. They were illusions woven from fear. The only real chain was your belief that you needed them. This is where the path of letting go truly begins. There comes a moment in every inner journey when you begin to notice that the act of holding on has shaped you more than the thing you are holding. You start to see the invisible patterns woven into your thoughts, the reflexes built from fear, the quiet desperation beneath the way you cling to certainty. Life becomes a mirror, reflecting not what you want to see, but what you need to understand. And in that mirror, you discover that every attachment has a root, and every root is entangled with a deeper truth you have avoided. Letting go begins not with release, but with honesty. The honesty to face the hidden corners of your identity. The Stoics believed that the human mind builds entire worlds from illusions. These illusions feel real because they protect you from the fragility of existence. You create identities around relationships, careers, expectations, and memories, and then you grip them tightly because without them, you fear you might not know who you are. The fear of the unknown becomes stronger than the discomfort of the familiar, even when the familiar is hurting you. As you walk deeper into the territory of your own mind, you begin to understand that much of what you cling to is not love, but fear disguised as loyalty. You fear being alone, so you cling to people even when their presence burdens your spirit. You fear change, so you cling to routines that slowly drain your vitality. You fear failure, so you cling to goals that no longer call to your heart. You fear the truth of impermanence, so you cling to memories, replaying them as if reliving the past can protect you from the future. The Stoics taught that fear is a teacher, not a punishment. It reveals the places where you resist life. It shows the gaps in your courage. It challenges the illusion that you can control anything beyond your own thoughts and actions. When you listen deeply to your fear, you discover that it is not telling you to avoid life, but to surrender to it. Letting go does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means releasing the false belief that you can force life to obey your desires. There is an image often used by the ancient thinkers of a bird gripping a branch during a storm. The bird does not cling because it believes the branch will never break. It clings because it trusts its own ability to fly if the branch falls. This is the essence of inner freedom. Strength is not found in holding on to the branch. Strength is found in knowing you can let go and still survive. Most people do not trust their wings. They trust only what they can grip. And this quietly becomes their suffering. As you look back on the events that shaped you, you begin to realize that the pain you carried was never just about what happened. It was about the meaning you attached to it. A heartbreak turns into a belief that you are unworthy. A failure becomes a belief that your dreams are impossible. A loss becomes a belief that life is unsafe. You carry these beliefs into every decision, every relationship, every quiet moment alone with your thoughts. They become invisible anchors dragging behind you, slowing your growth. Letting go requires the courage to examine these false meanings and release them like smoke dissolving into the sky. The ancient philosophers understood that suffering comes not from life itself, but from the resistance you build around it. Imagine holding a rope with both hands while someone pulls from the other side. The tighter you grip, the deeper the rope burns into your palms. The moment you let go, the pain stops, not because the rope changed, but because your attachment to the struggle changed. This is how the mind works. You fight for control, gripping tightly to expectations, and the friction between reality and your desire becomes suffering. The moment you loosen the grip, the world does not hurt you anymore. You begin to sense that letting go is not a single act but an unfolding process. It happens in small moments. in the breath you release after holding tension in your body for too long, in the thought you choose not to engage with, in the memory you let pass without reliving, in the silence where you admit that a chapter of your life has reached its natural end. You start to notice that peace is not found in the things you acquire, but in the things you release. Every moment of surrender opens a little more space within you, and in that space the mind begins to rest. As this space grows, you begin to see life differently. You realize that you were never meant to carry everything. You were never meant to control the world. You were meant to participate in it, to move with its rhythm, not against it. The Stoics often compared life to a dance, where every step flows into the next. When you try to control the dance, you stumble. When you surrender to the movement, you begin to glide. Letting go is the art of learning to move again. This shift is subtle but transformative. You start to understand that letting go is not a loss but a return. Returning to your true nature, to your ability to adapt, to your inner calm, to the clarity that comes when the mind stops fighting everything. You realize that you have carried many things that were never meant to be yours. You begin to place them down, one by one, not with bitterness, but with gratitude for what they taught you. This gratitude becomes the gentle doorway to healing, and as you breathe into this new awareness, you notice something unexpected. The world around you begins to soften. Colors seem more vivid. Conversations feel lighter. The weight on your chest loosens its grip. You no longer move through life trying to control every outcome. Instead, you begin to trust the natural unfolding of things, the quiet intelligence woven into the fabric of existence. You stop demanding certainty and start welcoming possibility. This is the first taste of inner peace, not a dramatic revelation, but a quiet settling, like dust falling after a storm. You walk forward with a little less fear, a little more clarity, sensing that the practice of letting go is slowly reshaping you from the inside. The chains you once believed were unbreakable begin to dissolve, not because the world changed, but because something within you has finally begun to align with the truth that freedom is not something you find. It is something you allow. And the journey continues, guiding you deeper into the art of releasing what was never meant to define you. There is a quiet threshold within you, one you rarely notice until life brings you to its edge. It is the space between what you know you must release and the courage it takes to finally open your hands. This threshold is fragile, tender, and often painful. But it is also sacred. It is the moment where the past and future touch, where the person you have been meets the person you are becoming. Letting go deepens here, not because you force it, but because you begin to understand that holding on has already taken more from you than letting go ever could. As your awareness expands, you realize that much of what you resist is not the act of release itself, but the uncertainty that follows it. The mind craves predictability, even when predictability suffocates the spirit. You cling to patterns because they feel familiar, not because they lead you toward peace. You cling to relationships because they fill a space in your life, not because they nourish your soul. You cling to identities because they offer stability, not because they reflect your true self. The Stoics understood this conflict deeply. They taught that human suffering grows from the desire for permanence in a world defined by change. You begin to witness yourself with clarity. You see how often you tried to control outcomes that were never yours to control. You remember the times you replayed conversations, wishing the past would rearrange itself. You recall how many nights you stayed stuck in loops of fear, imagining futures that never came true. And as these realizations rise within you, a strange relief begins to form. You start to understand that the burden you carried was not the world. It was your attempt to rewrite it. The shift continues as you turn inward. You notice the habits that anchor you to old versions of yourself, the thoughts that convince you you're not ready to grow, the emotions you suppress because you fear what lies underneath. Letting go is not about erasing these parts of yourself, it is about meeting them with honesty and compassion. The more you observe your inner landscape, the more you realize that your struggles were not flaws. They were signals, pointing toward places where you needed awareness, patience, and healing. The Stoics often spoke of the inner citadel, the quiet fortress within each of us that remains untouched by external events. You begin to sense this citadel now, not as a wall of cold detachment, but as a space of profound stability. It is where your deepest truth resides, unshaken by circumstance. You feel it when you sit alone in silence and your spirit does not collapse. You feel it when you let go of something you once thought you needed and discover you can still breathe. You feel it when you choose peace over control and find that the world does not fall apart. This inner stability is not built through force. It emerges through surrender. As you move through these realizations, something remarkable begins to happen. You start to loosen your grip on the illusion of control. You begin to trust that life has a rhythm wider than your expectations, wiser than your fears. You do not need to know what comes next. You only need to be present enough to meet it. The unknown stops feeling like a threat and begins to feel like a possibility. You realize that every ending you feared was simply the beginning of a new shape life was offering you. You start to release the heaviness within you. You stop chasing closure from people who cannot give it. You stop trying to rewrite the past. You stop fighting the natural shifts in your journey. And as you soften into this new way of being, you notice how much tension melts from your body. Your breath deepens. Your shoulders relax. The mind no longer spins in endless circles. This softness is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is the wisdom that comes from understanding that peace is not something you capture. It is something you create by aligning with the truth of impermanence. Letting go continues to unfold in layers. You release resentment, not because the past deserves forgiveness, but because you deserve peace. You release expectations, not because desire is wrong, but because rigid attachment steals your ability to adapt. You release identities that once protected you, now recognizing they also limit you. These releases feel different. Sometimes gentle, sometimes sharp, sometimes bittersweet. But each one brings you closer to the quiet strength the Stoics called freedom. With each passing moment, you begin to sense the spaciousness that acceptance creates. You notice how much lighter you become when you stop dragging yesterday into today. You notice how much clearer your thoughts become when you stop fearing the future. You notice how much more alive you feel when you stop trying to control the rhythm of life. You begin to see that freedom is not found in the absence of pain, but in the absence of resistance to pain. Peace is not found in perfect conditions, but in the mind that no longer demands perfection. The world around you starts to look different. Conversations become more meaningful because you're no longer lost in hidden expectations. Experiences become more vivid because you're no longer trapped in thought. Moments become fuller because you're no longer fragmented between past and future. This is what the Stoics meant by living in accordance with nature, not obeying fate, but aligning with the truth that life is always changing, always moving, always asking you to participate without fear. You realize now that letting go is not a destination. It is an ongoing relationship with life. Every step teaches something new. Every surrender reveals a deeper strength. Every release opens more space within you. And slowly you begin to see that letting go is not the art of losing. It is the art of returning to yourself, to presence, to peace, to the quiet wisdom that has always lived inside you. And as you continue walking this path, you sense that you are not moving away from anything. You are moving toward the freedom you have always longed for. There is a moment in the journey of letting go when you realize that the world has never asked you to be as strong as you have demanded of yourself. You begin to see that many of the burdens you carried were not obligations, but choices made from fear, from habit, from the quiet belief that you must hold everything together alone. This realization does not arrive loudly. It comes softly, like a breath you didn't know you were holding until the body finally exhales. And in that exhale, you feel something shift, a loosening of the invisible knots that have tangled your spirit for far too long. The Stoics often wrote about the weight of unnecessary suffering, the silent heaviness created when the mind tries to control what it cannot. You start to see these layers within yourself. The moments when you rehearsed conversations you would never have. The times you tried to predict outcomes as if foresight could protect you from disappointment. The nights you carried the entire future on your shoulders, believing that worry was the same as preparation. You begin to understand that most of this effort was born from misunderstanding. Worry never protected you. Anxiety never prepared you. Control never guaranteed safety. These were illusions, comforting in theory, exhausting in practice. As you sit with this truth, a gentle humility rises within you. Letting go is not about being above emotion or immune to fear. It is about finally acknowledging that your fear does not need to steer your life. You begin to hear your inner voice more clearly, no longer drowned out by noise or panic. This voice does not push or demand, it guides. It whispers the truths you have avoided, that some battles are not yours to fight, that some chapters are meant to close, that some losses are actually openings, and that peace often grows when you stop trying to bend the world to fit your expectations. With each passing day, your relationship with uncertainty transforms. Instead of resisting it, you start to explore it. Instead of fearing the unknown, you begin to listen to it. The unknown loses its sharp edges and becomes something softer, like a horizon seen from afar, unreachable yet beautiful. You realize that there has always been more possibility in the unknown than in the past you already know too well. The Stoics did not fear uncertainty, they embraced it, understanding that it is the birthplace of growth, creativity, resilience, and renewal. There is a quiet strength in the person who walks forward without needing guarantees. You start to cultivate this strength not by forcing yourself into bravery, but by gently releasing the belief that you must have every answer before you take a step. You begin to trust that you can meet whatever comes with clarity and adaptability. This trust becomes a form of internal liberation. It frees your mind from the chains of overthinking, the endless loops of what-ifs, the paralysis of imagined scenarios. You start to feel alive again, not because everything becomes simple, but because you are no longer fighting yourself at every turn. Letting go also brings you face to face with your attachments to identity. You begin to understand that many of the labels you carried were created long before you had the wisdom to question them. You were told who you should be, what you should want, what success should look like, how strength should appear, and you unconsciously shaped yourself around these expectations. But as the practice of letting go deepens, these labels begin to fall away. You realize that the image you built was a compromise, a negotiation between who you truly are and who you believed you needed to be to receive approval or safety. This realization is both unsettling and freeing. You begin to release the identity that no longer reflects your spirit. In this space of release, you reconnect with parts of yourself that were forgotten. The curiosity you silenced, the creativity you postponed, the dreams you hid because they felt impractical, the gentleness you buried beneath armor. These parts return not to overwhelm you, but to remind you that the self you abandoned is still alive, waiting to be invited back into your life. The Stoics wrote often about returning to one's nature, and now you understand that letting go is not a loss of self. It is the reunion with the self you left behind. As this inner homecoming unfolds, your emotional landscape begins to shift. You notice that your reactions soften. The things that once triggered anxiety lose their power. The fears that once shook you feel distant, as if you are watching them from a place of clarity rather than drowning in them. You begin to understand your emotions without being consumed by them. You feel sadness without collapsing. You feel joy without gripping it out of fear that it might leave. You feel anger without letting it define you. This emotional freedom is one of the deepest forms of letting go. Not the release of emotions, but the release of your attachment to them as identities. There is a profound peace in learning that you do not need to hold on to every emotion, every thought, every storyline your mind creates. You can watch them rise and fall like waves, knowing each one is temporary. The Stoics believed that wisdom comes from distinguishing what is within your control from what is not. You begin to see that your thoughts and emotions are visitors, not rulers. What you control is how you relate to them, and as you shift this relationship, the mind begins to quiet. The storm within you loses its force. You begin to walk through life with a stillness that cannot be easily shaken. In the midst of this transformation, you begin to appreciate the beauty of impermanence. You no longer see loss as something to dread, but as something that creates space for what is yet to come. You no longer see endings as evidence of failure, but as proof that life is still moving. You no longer see change as a threat, but as a doorway to possibilities you once feared to imagine. Impermanence becomes your teacher, your ally, your guide into deeper wisdom. You realize that clinging to permanence was what trapped you in suffering. And as you step further into this understanding, you feel something subtle and powerful emerging from within you, a quiet confidence, a groundedness, an inner resilience that does not depend on circumstance. This is the fruit of letting go. Not detachment from life, but a deeper participation in it. Not numbness, but presence. Not withdrawal, but alignment. You begin to walk through life lighter, clearer, freer than before. And you sense that the journey is far from over. It is unfolding inward, guiding you toward a deeper truth you are now ready to hear. There comes a moment in every inner journey when you finally begin to see that the things you have been clutching so tightly were never truly yours in the first place, and in that soft realization, a strange kind of peace begins to grow. Not the peace that comes from control, but the peace that arises when you stop demanding certainty from a world that was never built to offer any. It feels like standing at the edge of a quiet lake after a storm, watching the ripples slowly settle, remembering that the water was always clear beneath the agitation, and understanding that your mind works in the same way. For so long you believed you needed to force calmness, as if stillness could be created by sheer will, but now you start to notice that stillness appears naturally the moment you stop stirring the surface. In this stage of letting go, the mind begins to open to a deeper truth. Not everything that leaves is a loss, and not everything that stays is a gift. You begin to understand that life moves according to its own rhythm, carrying away things at the exact moment they are finished, and delivering new experiences right when they are needed. You realize that your suffering did not come from the movement of life itself, but from your insistence that things should move differently. You were asking for the river to stop flowing while you stood knee-deep in it, wondering why you felt such resistance. The Stoics knew this intimately. They understood that the river does not bend because you wish it to. They also understood that if you align yourself with the current, it will carry you with far less struggle, even if it takes you somewhere unexpected. And it is here, in this quiet inward shift, that another layer of freedom unfolds. You begin to let go not only of external attachments but also of the inner illusions that shaped your identity. You begin to question the beliefs you built your life around, the assumptions you never examined, the fears you learned so early that they felt like parts of your personality. You start to see that your mind has been carrying stories for years, stories about what you can and cannot do, stories about what you deserve, stories about the dangers waiting for you in the dark corners of uncertainty. Slowly, almost cautiously, you start to examine them. You turn them over in your hands the way a child studies a seashell, realizing some of them are cracked and empty, leftovers from moments long gone. You begin to see that many of your limitations were inherited rather than chosen. And in that recognition, something inside loosens just a little more. This loosening is not dramatic. It does not rush in like a revelation. It comes in tiny shifts, when a fear feels slightly less powerful than before, when a memory loses its emotional weight, when a desire that once consumed you begins to feel strangely irrelevant. You notice that you no longer need certain validations to feel secure. You no longer need every opinion to confirm your worth. You no longer need to rehearse imaginary conversations in your mind. The grip of the ego weakens, and in its place grows something gentler, quieter, and infinitely stronger inner space. This space is not empty, it is the beginning of clarity. It is the doorway through which wisdom enters. And yet, even as you evolve, you discover that letting go is not a single decision, but a repeated action, a choice made again and again as life continues to challenge you. You will still encounter people who disappoint you, still face uncertainty, still wake with doubts, still feel the instinct to cling. But now, instead of reacting immediately, you pause. That pause becomes one of the greatest victories of your life. In that pause lies your ability to choose, not with emotional urgency but with grounded presence. You learn to ask yourself whether your reaction comes from fear or from understanding. You start to see that every moment gives you two paths, the one where you cling and the one where you release. And each time you choose release, even in small ways, you strengthen a part of your character that had long been neglected. In this stage, you begin to understand another profound truth. Letting go does not mean abandoning your responsibilities or withdrawing from life. It does not mean denying your emotions or pretending not to care. It means showing up fully without trying to control the outcome. It means loving without demanding possession, hoping without insisting on guarantees, working without measuring your worth by results. You start to act not because the world promises you something in return, but because action itself is right. The Stoics did not teach resignation, they taught participation without attachment. And in this, you start to discover a freedom that is deeper than pleasure and more stable than comfort. This freedom becomes especially clear when you reflect on time. You begin to understand that holding on is often a rebellion against the flow of time, a refusal to accept that things change, a desperate attempt to freeze moments that were never meant to last. But when you accept change as a fundamental law of existence, your relationship with time transforms. You stop trying to pause life. You stop trying to rewind it. You begin to live more vividly in the present because you know it is the only place where life actually occurs. You notice the texture of each moment, the way sunlight falls through your window, the sound of footsteps on a quiet street, the warmth of someone's laugh, the softness of your breath. You begin to live not in the shadows of anticipation or memory, but in the simple truth of now. And in this awareness, you unlock another dimension of letting go, the surrender of resistance. You stop fighting every discomfort, stop resenting the difficulties that shape you, stop interpreting challenges as punishments. Instead, you begin to see them as teachers. You start to recognize that growth rarely happens in ease. You understand that the obstacles you once begged life to remove were the very experiences shaping your inner strength. A strange gratitude emerges, a gratitude not for the pain itself, but for the transformation that followed it. And once this gratitude takes root, letting go becomes less of a struggle and more of an honoring. You let go not because you are tired, but because you respect the natural unfolding of life. Here you begin to observe something subtle but powerful. The more you release, the more you receive, not in the form of possessions or achievements, but in clarity, peace, and emotional resilience. You start to respond to life instead of reacting to it. You begin to guide your inner world with more grace. You carry yourself differently, not with arrogance, not with detachment, but with grounded presence. People sense this shift. They cannot always name it, but they feel the calmness around you, the way you listen without trying to fix, the way you speak without trying to dominate, the way your presence itself seems to settle the room. This is the quiet strength of someone who has begun to shed the unnecessary. And slowly, almost without realizing it, you start to experience one of the greatest gifts of letting go: emotional independence. You begin to notice that your peace no longer rises and falls with the moods of others. Your sense of identity no longer depends on approval or validation. You stop expecting the world to shape itself according to your comfort. This is the moment when inner peace becomes more than a philosophical idea. It becomes a lived reality. It becomes the air you breathe. When you look back at who you were before this journey began, you do not feel judgment or shame. You feel compassion. You understand why you held on so tightly: for survival, for safety, for belonging. You acknowledge the part of you that clung because it did not know there was another way. That younger version of you was doing the best it could. Letting go includes letting go of self-blame, letting go of the past version of yourself, letting go of the harsh stories you once used to explain your wounds. You start to realize that forgiveness is not something you give to someone else. It is something you allow yourself to experience. As Part 5 draws toward its quiet end, something subtle but powerful takes shape within you. You begin to sense that letting go is not the end of anything. It is the beginning of everything. You start to feel the weight of old fears dissolving, old identities fading, old patterns losing their grip. What remains is a spaciousness that feels both unfamiliar and deeply natural, as if this is who you were always meant to be beneath the layers of attachment and fear. You feel yourself stepping into a new phase of life, not defined by what you hold, but by what you are finally free enough to release. As the journey continues, you begin to notice that letting go is no longer something you merely practice. It becomes something you begin to embody without effort, like a muscle that has finally learned the rhythm of its own movement. There is a quiet confidence forming inside you, not loud or rigid, but soft and expansive, the kind of confidence that does not need to announce itself because it comes from understanding rather than achievement. You start to observe the world with clearer eyes, seeing patterns you once overlooked, recognizing the subtle causes behind emotional storms, and understanding that much of your previous suffering arose from misinterpreting the natural flow of life. This new clarity brings a deeper kind of humility, the humility of realizing just how little you control and just how little you need to control. You become a witness to your own mind, watching thoughts rise and dissolve like clouds drifting across a wide sky. You no longer chase every thought as if it carries truth. You no longer fear every emotion as if it holds danger. You learn to let both appear and disappear without becoming entangled in their stories. And in this simple shift, you step closer to the Stoic understanding of freedom, the ability to choose your inner response regardless of outer circumstances. You begin to notice how often the world tries to pull you back into old rhythms. Opinions demanding your reaction, events trying to stir your anxieties, memories resurfacing to test your resolve. But each time something tries to pull you into chaos, you find yourself pausing, breathing, observing. The pause becomes your anchor. It is the space in which wisdom grows. It is the moment in which you reclaim the present. In that pause, you hear the whisper of a truth you had forgotten. You do not have to attend every disturbance that calls your name. With this understanding, letting go begins to extend into deeper terrain. You start releasing expectations, the silent demands you place on life, people, and yourself. Expectations that others should understand you, that circumstances should be fair, that your path should always be smooth, that your efforts should be rewarded exactly as you imagine. When these expectations fall away, life stops feeling like a battlefield. It begins to unfold without resistance. You start receiving experiences as they come, not as you wish them to be. And in this acceptance, a warmth rises within you, a tenderness toward existence itself. You also begin to understand that letting go includes releasing the illusion of permanence. Nothing stays the same, not relationships, not seasons, not feelings, not even your own identity. At first this truth feels unsettling, a reminder of fragility. But soon you realize it is the very nature of impermanence that allows life to be meaningful. The beauty of a moment lies in its passing. The value of a memory lies in its impossibility to return. You begin to appreciate things more deeply because you no longer expect them to stay. You savor conversations, noticing the pauses between words. You appreciate the presence of people without gripping them tightly. You enjoy the warmth of sunlight without asking it to last. And this simple awareness transforms ordinary moments into miracles. The more you align with impermanence, the more you begin to appreciate the power of presence. You find yourself listening more fully, observing more gently, breathing more consciously. You no longer rush through life. You no longer hurry toward outcomes. You start to understand that you were never meant to live in a constant chase. The Stoics taught that the present moment is enough, that it is always enough, that it contains everything required for peace, if you meet it with the right state of mind. And now you begin to experience this truth directly. As your relationship with the present deepens, you start letting go of the constant internal narration. The commentary that once filled your mind with judgments, comparisons, fears, and assumptions. You realize that this voice is not your true self. It is a conditioned echo, a survival mechanism shaped by years of repetition. When you stop taking every thought seriously, something extraordinary happens. The mind becomes quieter. Not silent, not empty, just calmer, like a field after rain. In that calmness you begin to hear the deeper voice of intuition, the quiet knowing that lies beneath mental noise. It doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it simply reveals. And when you listen to it, life becomes more aligned. At this stage, you begin to meet yourself with a gentleness you had forgotten long ago. You forgive your past mistakes, recognizing that they were made by someone who was still learning. You forgive the moments you lost to fear, the choices you made from insecurity, the words you said when you were hurting. You start to see your past self not as a burden, but as a traveler who walked the difficult part of the road so that you could walk the next part with more wisdom. Letting go becomes less like breaking away and more like returning to your own heart with understanding instead of judgment. This compassion naturally extends outward. You start to look at people differently, not through the lens of their actions, but through the lens of their hidden struggles. You begin to understand that everyone carries invisible burdens, wounds they never speak about, fears they hide behind laughter, hopes they quietly protect. You stop expecting perfection from others. You stop taking their behavior personally. You begin to respond to conflict with patience instead of defensiveness. And in doing so, you create a kind of inner and outer harmony that once felt impossible. A subtle but profound transformation begins here. You let go of the need to win imaginary battles. You no longer waste energy proving your worth, defending your pride, or controlling how people perceive you. You start choosing peace over victory, clarity over dominance, presence over ego. And yet this does not make you weaker, it makes you unshakable. You become like a tree rooted deeply in the earth. Winds may sway you, storms may test you, but you do not break. Your stability comes not from hardness but from alignment. In this new phase, you also begin letting go of the illusion that happiness must come from extraordinary moments. You realize that joy was always hidden in the small, easily overlooked details. The taste of warm tea, the color of the sky after rain, the softness of morning light, the quiet comfort of familiar routines. When you release the idea that happiness must be earned through struggle or achievement, it becomes accessible in every moment. You begin to feel grateful without forcing yourself. Gratitude becomes a natural state, a byproduct of presence. As Part 6 moves toward its conclusion, you sense that you are stepping into a deeper dimension of the journey, a place where letting go is no longer about releasing external attachments or old emotions, but about surrendering to life itself. You begin to understand that surrender is not the collapse of strength, but the highest form of wisdom, a recognition that peace arises not from controlling the world, but from aligning with its flow. You feel yourself standing at the threshold of a new way of being, carrying less weight, holding fewer illusions, and walking with a clearer, steadier heart. And though you know there is more to release, more to learn, more to shed, you also sense that you are finally moving in harmony with the invisible current that carries all things, and for the first time you trust where it leads. There comes a point in this unfolding journey where you begin to feel the quiet strength of a person who has shed so many layers that only the essential remains. You do not become emotionless, but your emotions no longer rule you. You do not become detached, but your attachments no longer imprison you. You stand in a delicate balance, aware of your inner world and aware of the ever-changing outer world, and you start navigating both with a grace that surprises even you. It feels as though life has softened its grip, not because circumstances have changed, but because you have changed the way you meet them. In this stage, you begin to sense that every experience, whether joyful or painful, serves as a kind of unveiling, revealing parts of you that had long been hidden beneath fear, pride, or expectation. You begin to see that every loss created space for something new to emerge, every disappointment reshaped your direction, every challenge carved depth into your character. You see how life has been quietly sculpting you with its invisible chisel, refining you through everything you once resisted. And as this awareness settles into your bones, something inside you relaxes. You no longer feel the need to fight the flow of events. You no longer cling to the illusion that life owes you a specific outcome. You begin to trust the unfolding, even when you cannot see where it leads. This trust marks the beginning of a profound internal shift. You notice that your mind no longer jumps to worst-case scenarios as easily as before. You no longer catastrophize small inconveniences, no longer interpret uncertainty as danger. Instead, you start to welcome uncertainty as a space of possibility, as the place where all transformation begins. The Stoics taught that uncertainty is not the enemy. Our fear of it is. When you stop fearing uncertainty, you discover that it holds freedom, the freedom to reinvent, to choose differently, to evolve beyond your previous limits. And now you begin to feel that freedom directly. Your relationship with desire also begins to evolve. You do not stop wanting things, but the wanting loses its desperation. You can desire without grasping, hope without demanding, pursue without attachment. You start to appreciate the journey more than the destination, the process more than the reward. You begin to act not out of hunger, but out of alignment. And ironically, it is in this state, when you stop clinging to outcomes, that your efforts begin to bear deeper fruit. Your actions become cleaner, your motivations purer, your results calmer. You do things because they feel right, because they matter, because they reflect your character. This shift from outcome-driven living to principle-driven living is one of the greatest transformations of letting go. As you move deeper into this new way of being, you begin to notice a subtle sense of spaciousness around your thoughts. They no longer bump into each other in frantic patterns. They rise slowly and fall gently, giving you room to observe them without being swept away. In this space, wisdom begins to appear, not as a voice shouting instructions, but as a quiet presence guiding you toward clarity. You start to see that wisdom does not come from accumulation, but from reduction, from peeling away what is unnecessary, from removing the noise that obscured your inner compass. The less you carry, the more clearly you perceive. This clarity changes your relationship with others. You begin to speak with more honesty, but also more kindness. You listen with more attention, not waiting for your turn to respond, but genuinely absorbing what is being shared. You no longer seek to win arguments, you seek understanding. You no longer enter conversations to assert yourself, you enter them to connect. You realize that every person is a world of their own, filled with joys you have never felt and struggles you will never see. And when you interact with people from this awareness, relationships become lighter, deeper, more genuine. You stop needing others to validate you, and because of that freedom, you can finally meet them as they are, not as projections of your unmet needs. A profound gentleness begins to grow within you. Gentleness toward your past, your fears, your flaws, your imperfections. You stop measuring your worth through comparison. You stop resenting the parts of you that took longer to heal. You begin to see every crack in your character, not as a weakness, but as a doorway through which growth entered. You understand that your mistakes were lessons wearing imperfect masks, and that your pain was a teacher disguised as loss. This gentleness allows you to stand with a kind of quiet self-respect. You no longer need to punish yourself for being human. And as your inner world stabilizes, something else reveals itself. The realization that letting go does not mean distancing yourself from life, but entering it more fully. You begin to feel more alive, not because everything is easy, but because you no longer resist the truth of how things are. You stop exerting energy on holding the world in a fixed shape. You allow life to surprise you. You allow emotions to pass through you. You allow beginnings and endings to dance without your intervention. You begin to see beauty not only in what stays, but in what passes, in what changes, in what transforms. In this greater awareness, you start to notice how rarely people pause to simply be. The world moves quickly, chasing goals, distractions, noise, and validation. But you, through the practice of letting go, have stumbled upon a hidden rhythm, the rhythm of life beneath the noise. You begin to move more slowly, not out of laziness, but because you are aligned with a deeper pace. You start valuing silence, not as emptiness, but as nourishment. And in the silence, you discover a peace that does not depend on external circumstances. It is a peace that arises from presence, from acceptance, from understanding your place in the vastness of existence. In this quiet peace, you realize something profound about love. You begin to see that love is not possession, control, attachment, or fear. Love is spacious. Love allows freedom. Love is the act of witnessing someone without holding them hostage to your expectations. You begin to love people in a more authentic way, not for what they give you, not for how they make you feel, but simply for who they are. And this kind of love is stronger because it is not threatened by change. It does not collapse when life shifts. It is rooted in presence rather than dependency. As your inner landscape continues to shift, you start recognizing that letting go is not a linear journey. Some days you feel light and free. Other days old fears and attachments return, trying to reclaim their place. But now you meet them with understanding rather than panic. You see them as remnants of older selves, echoes that fade over time. You no longer criticize yourself for having moments of struggle. You understand that growth is a spiral, not a straight line. And in this acceptance, you find a deeper resilience. Toward the end of this stage, you begin to sense that the journey is guiding you towards something even deeper. Something beyond emotional freedom, beyond intellectual understanding. It is guiding you toward an inner state that cannot be shaken by external turbulence, a foundation that stands firm even when the world shifts. You begin to realize that the more you release, the more you return to your true self, the self that existed long before fear, before conditioning, before insecurity. This self is not built, it is uncovered. It is the quiet awareness behind every thought, the stillness beneath every emotion, the presence that has always been observing your life unfold. And as this realization begins to dawn, you feel yourself stepping into a new threshold, ready to enter the final stage of letting go. The stage where inner peace is not something you chase, but something you simply are. There comes a gentle moment, almost unnoticed, when you realize that everything you have been seeking through struggle, through grasping, through fear, has been quietly waiting beneath the layers you have finally begun to release. It is not dramatic or overwhelming. It is subtle, like the first light of dawn slowly dissolving the darkness, not by force but by presence. In this moment, you understand that inner peace was never something to be achieved. It was something to be uncovered. It was always there beneath the noise, beneath the expectations, beneath the stories you carried for years. And now, as the journey reaches its soft conclusion, you begin to feel the fullness of this truth. You notice that the weight you carried for so long has dissolved, not because the world changed, but because your relationship with it changed. You no longer cling to outcomes with fearful intensity. You no longer grip your identity as if it might vanish. You no longer resist the natural movement of life. Instead, you move with it the way a leaf moves with the wind, not out of helplessness, but out of trust. You no longer feel the need to fight every challenge or solve every uncertainty. You allow life to be vast, unpredictable, and alive, and in doing so, you discover a freedom that feels both ancient and new. This freedom carries a quiet wisdom. You begin to understand that the things you let go of were never the true source of your stability. Your stability came from clarity, from courage, from presence. It came from learning to stand with both feet in the moment, without trying to escape it or reshape it. You begin to appreciate the simplicity of this realization, that peace is not the absence of discomfort, but the absence of resistance. It is the ability to breathe deeply even when life is uncertain, to remain open even when outcomes are unclear, to stay grounded even when emotions rise. You realize you have become someone who is no longer swept away by every shifting current. And as you settle into this awareness, you begin to see your place in the world with new eyes. You recognize that everyone around you is carrying their own battles, their own fears, their own attachments. You see how easily people become entangled in their illusions, how often they confuse control with safety, how easily they sacrifice peace for certainty. Yet instead of judging them, you feel compassion. You understand that each person is walking their own path of letting go, even if they do not yet know it. You begin to feel connected to others in a deeper way, not through shared identity, but through shared humanity. This connection extends to the world itself. You begin to walk more softly, noticing things you once overlooked. The sound of the wind moving through trees, the shimmer of light on water, the quiet rhythm of your own breath. These small details become sacred, not because they are extraordinary, but because you are finally present enough to see them. You start living not as someone rushing through life, but as someone walking with it. You begin to cherish the pauses, the stillness, the silence between moments, understanding that they are as essential as the moments themselves. This presence opens the door to gratitude, not a gratitude forced by optimism, but a gratitude born from clarity. You begin to appreciate the challenges that shaped you, the losses that guided you, the uncertainties that strengthened you. You understand that every difficulty you once tried to avoid was a part of your becoming, a necessary step on a path you could not see at the time. You no longer resent your past. You no longer fear your future. You finally stand fully in the present, feeling a quiet sense of belonging in your own life. As you settle deeper into this new way of being, you begin to feel a profound sense of alignment, an inner congruence between your thoughts, your actions, and your values. You start doing things not to impress, not to escape, not to please, but simply because they are right, because they matter, because they reflect the person you are becoming. You live more intentionally, not out of discipline, but out of understanding. You choose simplicity over excess, presence over distraction, authenticity over illusion. And as you make these choices, you begin to feel more at home within yourself than you ever have before. Then comes a moment when you realize that letting go has brought you full circle. You started this journey trying to escape discomfort, trying to shield yourself from the unknown. But now you find yourself embracing both discomfort and uncertainty with open hands, understanding that they contain the very essence of growth. You understand that nothing alive remains still, and nothing meaningful remains unchanged. The Stoics taught that the universe is a constant act of creation and dissolution, and now you see this truth not as a philosophical idea, but as a lived experience. You begin to move with the rhythm of existence, trusting its ebb and flow the way you trust your breath. And gradually, you begin to see that letting go was never about losing anything important. It was about clearing the way for what is real. It was about making space for peace, clarity, presence, and freedom. It was about returning to yourself, your true self, the one that exists beyond fear, beyond ego, beyond attachment. You realize you have not become someone new. You have returned to someone you always were beneath the layers of conditioning and struggle. You feel like someone waking from a long sleep, seeing the world with fresh eyes, carrying a stillness that cannot be shaken. As the journey reaches its quiet conclusion, you stand at the threshold of your life with a heart that is no longer burdened by unnecessary weight. You feel lighter, clearer, more grounded. The storms of the world no longer unmake you. The shifting winds of circumstance no longer confuse you. You understand that everything changes, and yet something within you remains steady, timeless, untouched. You realize that true freedom was never found in controlling life, but in releasing your grip on what you cannot keep. In the soft quiet of this final moment, you breathe deeply and feel a calm rise within you, the calm of someone who has learned to let life be what it is, and to let themselves be who they are. And with this calm, you understand the final truth the Stoics whispered across centuries. The more you let go, the more you are free. And in that freedom, you finally find the inner peace you were seeking all along.